Hello and welcome to this episode of the Breaking the Blueprint podcast with myself, Vinay Parmar, and my co-host, Iqbal Javaid. We're here to talk all things to do with customer loyalty, customer experience, really answering the question, how do we get customers to come back and do it again? And we've got a really exciting guest to talk to today with a really interesting topic, I think. So before we get into introducing John to all of you, Iqbal, how have you been, and how are things since the last podcast?
Yeah, very well, thanks. And it's been a few weeks since we met, and it feels like the whole world's falling apart around us at the moment. Since the last episode, I'm pretty sure everything was pretty stable back then. So it's just been quite challenging in trying to figure out what normal looks like. We're trying to get on with everything, and having great conversations like this whilst all that's going on, and it's busy as ever. Really excited about today's episode and our guest, and one of my favorite topics, which we'll obviously go into in a second, all around storytelling. So yeah, looking forward to that. How about yourself?
Yeah.
How have you been?
Well, I was almost not here because I was in Dubai and I got back on the Thursday before everything went crazy on the Friday. So got back in by the skin of my teeth. And it's been a busy period. I've been out doing a couple of keynotes. I did a closing keynote for Swim England last week. That was a really great event. And that was all about engaging people in swimming and increasing the numbers in aquatics around participation. How do we do that? And getting an organization that's a body that has lots of different stakeholders that they don't control, like leisure centers and suppliers and all of those. So really talking about the internal part of working together to create the outside experience. That was quite a cool conference to do. And then the other thing I've become slightly obsessed with, I discovered a YouTube channel by a guy called Matt Armstrong. I don't know if you've ever come across this guy, but like, I'm not a petrol head. I'm not into cars anyway. If most people that know me would not let me anywhere near the mechanics in their car because I'm likely to break something. But he buys these supercars that have been wrecked and then rebuilds them with his dad in his garage in Leicester. And he's grown his following to like 6.4 million followers. His videos get millions of followers. But it's not the car making that fascinates me. What I love watching is this guy is a mechanic. Clearly he knows his way around a car, but he's fixing cars that he has no experience of working on. And he's finding ways through challenges, and he's using his learning from working on other cars and other things and bringing them. So at the moment he's building a Bugatti, rebuilding a Bugatti Chiron. And Bugatti won't supply him the parts because they don't agree with what he's doing. So he's navigating, finding other parts from, like, part of the VAG, part of the Volkswagen group. He'll pick parts from somewhere else, but he'll also look at 3D printing stuff and just these really interesting novel ways to get through it. So it's that whole finding different ways to solve the problem. And I liken it to the work that both you and I do when we're working with clients, is that often we see the paralysis, don't we, from the perfect conditions and people having the perfect tools. And actually, they often have more to their disposal than they think they do, and they can get started with something. Yeah. So it's a great metaphor for that. But I'm just addicted to it. I just love him working through the challenge and then coming out at the end.
It's the journey, isn't it? I think that's what it is. You're on that journey with Matt Armstrong throughout, seeing how he's going to solve all of these challenges that he's coming across. And it's, as you say, it's very much like that in our lives as well. So definitely. What outcome you want to achieve is. Actually, you got to have fun on the way as well, on that journey with the people that you're with. So
it's a pretty amazing story as well, from someone who started, I think, fixing his girlfriend's Audi TT on their driveway to now. His life has changed. Incredible. So brilliant, and really interesting thing to do, and loosely linked to what we're going to talk about today in terms of storytelling, because Matt does a great job of telling the story on the journey. But so let's introduce our guest, John Elbing. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, I'm happy to be here with both of you, and I'm sure we'll have a great conversation.
So the eagle-eyed viewers who normally watch our podcast will notice we're not in the same place at the same time as you usually are. So John, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about you, your background. I know you spent a lot of time working with founders and startups in various different guises, but also a little bit about where you are in the world would be great.
Okay, well, I'm in Geneva, Switzerland, which is pretty calm right now, luckily. So I was born in the States, and I've been here, but I've been here most of my life. I was a software engineer. I started out with code, and then you get into project management and all this kind of thing. I did some of the first e-banking websites, at the turn of the century kind of thing for a few banks. And I went back for an MBA in finance, and I thought, oh, wow, finance, never again. But it's good to have some background. Then I quit all that to do some startups that didn't quite work out, but, great learning experience. Then I worked in digital marketing agencies. And so at a little over 50, I sort of think, what do I want to do with my life? And this combination of tech, finance, marketing, startups brought me, I was in this, entrepreneur world. And so I started coaching startups through, state organizations, incubators, accelerators, and things like that. And I really dived into these methods. I have like this compilation of like 100 canvases where I use Post-its, and I tried things, value proposition canvas, this and all these things. And at one point I found that the entrepreneurs were sort of got a lot of insight, had, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and then Monday morning they weren't quite sure what to do with it. And so I did this training on storytelling, which was StoryBrand, Don Miller, which is a great framework for storytelling. And I started using that extensively because I found that storytelling forces you talk to people, I worked with startups and some of them very early stage, but even companies, it's sort of like, well, we do this, 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 and this for all these people, for everyone. And there's this sort of mess of explanation. And when you have to put little pieces into a storytelling framework, you sort of have to say, well, who am I talking to? Who am I not talking to? What is important? What is less important? It's easy for someone outside to see what's more important, but for yourself, but also do this and also this. And this mechanism not only gives you a story, which is, a great thing, but it forces you to be clear and on your positioning, on who you work for, what you do, and all that. And so then I've been, working on my own version of it, which I call story building, and we'll get into that, where I think, there's more to it. But so now I work with companies and startup, and I teach and do different things around, positioning, alignment, clarity, storytelling, marketing, and all that.
Amazing. Yeah, great. Look, well, there's lots to unpack there. You've already touched on 3 or 4 great areas, which I'm sure we'll get into in a bit more detail.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, look, just for context, you and I had a conversation, I think 3 or 4, I think a couple of months ago now, I think maybe 3 months ago, beginning of the year, I think, where we dove into this topic a little bit and chatted about your experience and what you've been up to. And I found it really, really fascinating. So let's shall we
Yeah, let's get into it. I think, John, I think what I love about your intro there is you kind of told us a story, the journey that you've been on, and I love the way you kind of framed it. So that's going to kind of resonate and stick with us, and I guess that's what this is all about, isn't it? Working obviously in the industry for many years, we hear so many companies talk about storytelling, and those words do get used a lot across businesses, but it means different things to different people. Would love to get your perspective on actually what is storytelling all about, and why is it so important?
I can give the standard answer that, we've been evolved by using stories. We communicate by using stories. We understand by using stories. Everything we do sort of comes down to stories. So why suddenly should that be different in business? So, when it's just facts and numbers and things, somehow that doesn't resonate. And if you can, build a story, that connects much, much better.
Yeah.
I think that storytelling has become this buzzword where everything is storytelling. And some of it is tips and tricks. Like, hey, start with a hook and do this and dance on one leg while you do that, and talk louder and talk a little less, whisper and this and, kind of thing, and that's sort of, a trick to make a little bit of engagement. but that doesn't really help you build the story.
Mm.
And so then a thing like a framework like the Story Brand by Todd Miller is this, a structure of a story. So then that helps you build the story. But then you still have to know what story you're trying to build. And so it pops up in all different things on social media, on a post, and how you structure it and all that. And then, it sort of lost its meaning because it's just, storytelling and communication have become a little bit mixed. But the storytelling has, is more than just, a good way of communicating.
Yeah, it's there's so many parallels with what's happening in customer experience. I mean, the first point that I would have, or the comment I would have on what you just said is, storytelling is not theatrics. It's not the performance of the presentation, but it's part of the mix. That's not what we're talking about here. All the things that you talked about, having the compelling hook, using pacing, using language, stagecrafts, that's different, right? And when I look at customer experience in a similar way, the phrase customer experience has been sort of made to have all these other bits included. Yes, it's about customer experience. Yes, it's about contact centers, but that's not what it's really about. It's much broader than that. So I think that, I recognize that in what you say is a parallel to the world that Iqbal and I tend to do a lot of work in.
Yeah.
I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
For me, what really kind of resonates, I think, particularly in customer experience and storytelling, is a brand can tell you their view of what their story is, and you may believe that to an extent, but actually you want proof of that. You want to see, okay, you're telling me a great story here, but you're obviously going to tell me this story. But what actually, for me, what really works are things like customer reviews and things like that, where customers are actually telling their story in regards to how they interact with that brand and how it's impacted them. Simple things like, I bought this thing for my granddaughter and it really, changed her life, or whatever it was, that it had an impact on that individual, and that story is being told from the customer's voice. And I always find that really interesting is there is one aspect of this, we speak about the brand telling a story, but actually getting your customers to tell a story, I think that's so powerful. And maybe that's something we can dig into as well. But I guess we want to start with the organization. How do they begin this journey of being able to build a story? And actually, as you've said, we've talked about the comparison between storytelling and story building, but I guess you've got to start with the story building first.
So yeah, there are a few things here that you said was interesting. Is that, my company is called Standpoint because you have to go from your customer's standpoint.
Yeah.
So I love the idea of customers telling their story, and my whole thing is to flip the script and for the company to tell their customer story and not tell their own story. And then, it's also, they have to fit in that story. The other thing you said was that there was this transformation. The first example that came to mind was, and it changed her life. And I think customers are buying transformation. And so the story is about, your customer transformation. Why I called my method and book story building is that there are all these frameworks out there that tell you, start with this, and then this is the kind of structure that is engaging. But then people put the wrong pieces in it. You sort of say, well, I guess since I offer this solution, the problem must be the fact that they don't have my solution. So hey, and so the story building is really going in to analyze, taking your customer standpoint, analyzing, their aspirations, their challenges, their situation, their trigger moments, all these things, finding their vocabulary, how they see the issue, and then of course, looking at your offer, your company, your service, and seeing how that connects. And then you can put it into a framework where you say, okay, this is the first step, and this is the second step, and this is the third step. And I have a very strong view on what those 3 steps are. But often it's just, people have the wrong story. I work for this NGO that does water purification. And normally in a developing country, you'll ship by truck chlorine in powder form and put it in the water to purify the water. And they have a system where you produce the chlorine locally with electrolytes and water and salt. And we're talking about what the problem was that they solved. And in their mind, they were, people are getting sick. And so with their solution, people won't get sick. But when we dig a little bit deeper, the people that were going to buy this system the real problem was that the truck got stuck in the mud. The truck wouldn't deliver sometimes. And then they would run out of chlorine, and then people would get, the water would turn and things. So they were solving a logistic problem almost. And if they wanted to connect with their customer, it was sort of like, you're staying up waiting for that damn truck. Well, with our solution, you'll be autonomous, you'll be local. And that shift in perspective, I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. I definitely. It's funny. I was talking to a group of housing associations last week, sorry, and I did a session with them on about. We were talking about complaints data and so what. And part of the premise of my conversation with them is it's about how it's not the data, but it's how you present the data to tell a compelling story, to drive transformation and change in your organization. And people recognize the term storytelling, but actually the story building part is the bit that they miss. They have the component parts, but building the story to get buy-in to your initiative or idea or the thing that you need to change takes a different set of mechanics, I think. And I think partly, and again, I don't know whether you agree with this or not. Sometimes I look at storytelling and I think that's the charismatic part of the presentation. That's the charisma. That's the bit that is the performative piece. You're telling the story, whatever. But actually the character part, the thing that sits in the end of it is really the foundational principles of how you build this compelling story, which you can then communicate to your audience. And I think the second part that you said, John, around, the customer's viewpoint and listening to customers, we often hear so much in organizations. Yeah, we listen to our customers, we understand our customers, you segment them. And it's often either from a marketing perspective to how do we broadcast to the right people, or it's from how do we understand the demographics of the people that we're serving. But actually understanding your customer plays a really, really key role in building the story. To your point, who are you talking to? What's their life like? What's their lived experience? How do you get into their shoes? So I thought what I'd like to dive into is that whole difference between, because in our conversation, we really focused in onto something that you said that really got my brain ticking, right? The difference between storytelling and story building. Like, what is the difference? And how do you go about building the right story in the first place?
Okay, there's a lot of things there, but I'll jump into that directly. So I find that when we encounter a brand, and I know you're a lot about retention, but you have to get the right people first.
Yeah.
So when you encounter a brand, the first thing you do, even often unconsciously, is you need to recognize yourself in the brand. So if I go on to, I'm an independent consultant and I'm looking for a customer relationship management, a CRM system, and I go on a website and it says, we're the best for teams. And I think I'm not a team, and I've scrolled past. And probably their service would work fine for me too, but somehow I'm not their target audience. You walk down the street, you want to have a coffee with a friend, and you pass three cafes, and then suddenly the fourth one is the one, because somehow you recognize yourself in it. And I find companies don't often do that. They sort of say, hey, we do this. And it's sort of up to you to think, well, is that for big companies or small companies? I mean, do they like people like me? Do they understand me? So if you can find a way to describe your customer in a way where they really recognize themselves. If I land on a website that says, we do service for independent consultants with a white beard and a cat who live in Geneva, I'll think, wow, I don't know what they do yet, but I'm already hooked. So I call that recognition. And then there's perception, where you have to clearly understand what the offer is. And I often think, clarity is better than cleverness, and people want to put you in a box, or what category you're in, and things like that. I worked for this company that had this automate coffee machine, this big coffee machine thing. And people would say, well, why would we pay that price for, train station bad coffee? because in their mind, the only automated coffee machine they knew was that. So they put them in that box, and we worked on talking about a coffee shop in a box or a virtual barista. Compare us to the coffee shop experience, not to the train station. So once you have people that understand, they're all excited, that's the perfect service for me, then there's the doubt. So there's this third step, which is projection. What's it going to be like? I have to buy it and then install it and learn it and then use the old system while I'm using the new system and the thing. And then, but then do I have the right list? And then I have information and all this stuff. So I think I love your service and I'm going to come back next week. And then I don't, because so if you can help them, realize how simple it is, but then, the stakes that are there, and then, close their eyes and pre-live what it's like, sort of your promise of this better future. They're almost tasting it. There's this extra step into, and that'll create the engagement that could be put off with the doubt. So I feel that you get a better qualified leads at the beginning because the right people recognize themselves and are engaged, which means that the wrong people, the people that aren't your ideal clients might be turned away. And then you bring them a few steps further in engagement because they're already sort of feeling what it's like and be reassured, and you've removed these obstacles. And so it creates a more fluid transition where you have better leads and higher conversion if you can build that story that brings them through those steps.
Yeah. And I think just the beginning part of what you just said there, I think what I find is too many businesses go too generic in terms of either their particular offering or their customer. So what ends up happening, nobody resonates with that character that you built. As you mentioned, right? So somebody very specific in a particular geography, age group, whatever it is. I think that's where you've got to get it right, and it's difficult to do unless you've got a very clear service that you're offering. It's sometimes I'm finding that message in the beginning isn't clear, and if it's not clear in the beginning, then everything else then kind of starts to fall apart, doesn't it? At that point,
yeah. I think companies are scared to niche down because they're afraid to lose that one customer, that could, but if we narrow it down, these, we could lose a few, but then they end up being lukewarm for everybody.
I totally recognize that. So I think you end up becoming vanilla ice cream, the flavor for everybody. Yeah. And I recognize this. So when I first started to go freelancing, consulting and stuff, I had quite a generic, and I probably still don't have quite a tight, niched offerings in some respects, but it's got tighter. But in the beginning, I remember, having a conversation with a coach, which was about, you really need to know who you're talking to. And the moment I decided to do that and start to narrow in, I got an inquiry from somebody outside of that target group. And it just challenges you because you kind of go, oh, I've niched, but hang on, I've got this customer who doesn't quite fit the profile I want to work with, but they're from outside of that. And anyway, we didn't end up doing anything because the circumstances were not right for them. But it's interesting that fear of when I niche down, you almost translate that is that narrows down the pool, which means there's less. But actually, I think what I'm hearing John saying is that when you narrow that down, when you have a clarity about who you're talking to, your communication becomes supercharged and better. So you connect with them much better. Even things like the imagery you include in your website, in your advertising, people see themselves in that. There's something that I've often said, and I talk about from the stage and with clients, is that the customer needs to see themselves in your story or in the story. They need to see themselves there. When they don't see themselves, the first question they ask themselves is this really for me? I think that's what John was talking about just there. And if the question is this for me? And there's not a resounding yes, it is, they won't step forward because there'll be a hesitation. Like I was replacing a tap in the kitchen. I'm not a DIYer at all. So I was looking at all these videos. Yeah, except for guys. I was looking at all these videos about how to change this tap, and people, you need this tool, you need that tool, you need to take this out. I ended up finding this tap with this really simple mechanism that you can, And immediately I went, that's for me. That's for an idiot who doesn't know how to DIY. I am confident I can fit that. And I did, and it's still not leaking. So I must have done something right. But I think even that, so things like that, where I can see myself and go, that's for me. I've had that experience for sure. And I'm sure if you think, you probably have as well.
Yeah, I think just on that, the reason why it kind of resonated, why it worked for you, is because somebody showed you how easy it is to implement that particular tap. And that's the next bit of the apprehension, isn't it? I think, John, you mentioned there, it's one thing telling a story about how good your service is, but how does that actually translate in your life? And how do you actually transform to this new service? And that journey, I think, again, that's a separate component when it comes to the storytelling. Is you've got to crack that. That's got to it's got to be, you've got to remove any barriers, any friction or anything in order to get the customer to buy in, because they know how easy it is to be able to transform to this new service. And again, that I find that it can be quite difficult, because having a great product is great, but how do I actually consume this? Sometimes you just got to spell it out in your storytelling, I feel.
I sort of feel that those are linked. Vinay said that he recognized himself in the saying, okay, this is a thing for idiots or whatever. I mean, and then since you chose that niche, well, that carries down and the obstacles that you'll raise, the fact that you make it simple, the whole thing, I mean, it is coherent. I think, sometimes niche is pretty natural. So, so this company said, okay, there are things for plumbers. Well, let's be different and let's make a version that's easier for non-DIY people. And other times you sort of feel that you can choose to niche. Say I'm an accountant and I say, oh, hey guys, anybody need accounting? Or you can say, I'm an accountant specialized in landscapers or something. And if you have enough landscapers out there, they're all going to choose you because they feel, well, he knows our business. He's the one specialized for us. So, I mean, you can't niche down until you have your market is too small. But if people can feel that, you've gone to special care for them, that can be really powerful.
Definitely, because I think just that example, I mean, the tap is a tap. It looked like any other tap. But the thing that stood out was the ease of installation. So really, going back to your previous point, I think where you said earlier on in the opening part around really understand the problem you're trying to solve. The NGO example you gave of, it's about the logistical problem of trucks. What they understood was we're not solving the problem. Is you want a tap. What you want is something that's really easy to install, that you don't have to get a plumber in to come and do, that you can do in an hour at home and not have the hassle of trying to find somebody else. And that was understanding and then communicating that through their channel, their branding, their packaging, all of that kind of then became, I guess, a contribution to that story that can further confirm for me that this is easy and I'm going to be able to do this, and that confidence to be able to tackle it.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting about this story is you were the hero at the end of this story. And I think if you can, as a brand and an organization, if you can make your customer the hero, like now you feel like you're not a plumber, but yet you've now been able to solve this huge problem without paying a plumber to come in and do that. So you're now the hero of the story. And I think that's one of the things, again, also with storytelling, is if you can make your customer the hero rather than a lot of brands make themselves like, oh, we're the ones who are the hero in your story, doesn't quite resonate. And how you achieve that, I guess that can be quite difficult and challenging. I mean, it's easier said than done. But John, I mean, what's your?
I think one posture is this idea that you're the guide. You're Yoda, and they're Luke Skywalker. And there's so many stories out there where the hero, isn't sure and things. And there's this old wise guide that can, he could have solved the problem like that. But no, the story is about him helping this person become the hero. And the company should have that posture of saying, if you want to brag, don't brag about how great you are, brag how good you are at making your customer successful. and just that mind shift, and it makes quite a difference.
It does. I mean, Joseph Campbell's hero story framework. Star Wars is the famous movie that's kind of, I guess, made is the example that most people use of how it does it, and most Hollywood films follow a similar pattern. But when I was at Egg, when we launched Egg in the 90s, that hero's journey was used as part of our internal storytelling to our people. So leaders were the guides, and our heroes were our people who did the work. And so the role of the leader was to guide, to help them to overcome doubt, believe in them, all of those kind of things, as well as the other things you do as a leader in an organization. But that was an internal application of using the hero's journey.
But I think the storytelling, if you can tell your customer story, and so it's clear who you're helping, who you're servicing, what your mission is, how you make their lives better, and all that. And as a team, you can build that story together. It sort of creates an alignment and a purpose and a focus. I often find that there are two kinds of companies. There's one that says we need a marketing story, and then they go through the process and think, oh, wow, that was cool because it clarified our positioning and aligned our teams and others. And others saying, we need to work together to make more focus and better positioning. And, oh, cool, we got a marketing story out of it. And there's the two halves of this process. And it's not just it's strategy hidden in a storytelling thing. Companies are willing to pay for a marketing story, thinking, oh, that'll increase conversion and stuff. But they're not necessarily willing to, invest in, their internal alignment and, this focus, all that is so fuzzy. So it's sort of a Trojan horse where you get them to work on their marketing, and actually the bigger side effect is this focus and purpose and clarity internally. And I
think it's a really good point, because whilst you can tell a great story, when a customer interacts with your brand, question is, can you replicate that story for every customer that interacts with you every stage of that journey? And I think that the execution part is quite interesting, isn't it? Like, we talked about building a story. That's one aspect of this. But how do you get an organization to fulfill on this promise almost to the customer, to say, look, this is what we're doing to change our customers' lives. This is what we can do to change your life. And then when they start interacting with you, how do you ensure all aspects of your business is ready to be able to deliver on that? I think that's, I guess that's another challenge, isn't it? And it just goes beyond just the marketing aspects of it. But again, this is where organizations do fail.
I think marketing is how the door feels when you open the door of the store, how they, how they talk, how they answer the phone, and plus the colors on their website and all that. And so, if you can, by having this, my job often stops at the structure of the story. And then you can redo your website, redo your pitch deck, redo your calls, and create campaigns or, posts or whatever. Would have this core story or stories, because you can have then a story for a particular product line or a story for a particular company or something like that. But they sort of have this foundation, and then everything they do can sort of have this consistency, instead of saying one team is out doing TikToks while the other one is building the website and the third one is doing the showroom, and they don't feel the same. So it creates that foundation, which is really important.
Yeah. And I think that what you touched on there about that, in that the story being consistent at every interaction is what I spend my life talking about, and spend most of my work is focused on, is helping teams internally align behind that story, so that when they're executing their part of the story, it's consistent with what we're doing. I'm working with a brand at the moment that's got is on a journey to convey this new proposition they have, and they're telling the story from a marketing perspective. But if you call or you go on their website, it's not completely lined up yet. It's still, there's a misalignment. It doesn't reference certain things. It sounds very different when you call them. to when you read about them and when you see their branding. So the gap between the story that's told and the reality of what the customer experience is the challenge. And the smaller that gap is, the better you become and the stronger your brand is, I think.
Yeah.
And the bigger that gap is, the weaker your brand is, because your marketing is constantly having to work harder to keep convincing people, while the reality in the back end is not so great. And so when people actually come into it, they don't get the same magic that was conveyed in the story that was told by the marketing team.
Yeah, I think having that core message or that core story that the company represents has got to be kind of articulated across all aspects of the business, especially frontline teams when they're interacting with customers. They've got to fully kind of almost believe the hype that's been created by that business and being able to deliver it. What certainly what I'm from a technological aspect, we're coming across a lot of customers now replacing human interactions with AI, right? That's AI is now becoming the front door for many brands. So it's making sure that your AI language model has the right information around branding, what problems you're solving for the customers, creating those guardrails, and creating a personality for your front door of your business that has reflects exactly what we've just talked about here. And that's been quite challenging. What we're seeing with a lot of experiments right now is when your customers are engaging you, they don't really want to speak to an AI unless your AI really understands or it really is able to solve the problem based on the story that you're telling them from a marketing standpoint. And I don't think anybody's really solved this correctly today, but I think this is the other aspect of this now is it's more than just enabling the humans within your organization, but making sure that technologically you're also fulfilling on that promise.
Yeah. I think, AI, of course, now is everywhere.
Yeah.
I've worked with quite a number of startups in the AI space. Not too long ago, the message was, "This is amazing. We can do everything. This is crazy. You're going to see all this magic happening." And I think I see them evolving, where the story has become, you all know of the great potential of AI doing crazy, that, will increase your speed and productivity and quality and all this stuff. How about governance? How about privacy? How about security? How about brand voice? How about this? How about this? And so you don't have to hype up the possibilities anymore. You have to address to say, you're all overwhelmed with a million tools that promise, the moon. Well, we're starting from a foundation where you can, trust on all these issues and build something that is solid, and then you'll get the result. And that shift of where your customer's mind is in these tools is important.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting space, the AI thing, because I do think that hype cycle is obviously it's being pushed. There's a narrative sold that AI can do all these amazing things, but you still have to train it like you do a human. Like when you have humans in your business, they still have to understand your story, have the tools, have the knowledge to be able to do it. The AI needs the same thing. It needs to be trained in the story, so when it's executing the tasks, it's doing consistently with the story that you've created about your customers and your organization. That's still the same thing today. A human, I mean, the number of contact centers you call and you end up speaking to somebody, and you can tell they're just presenteeism. They're there for the paycheck. They're not invested in the brand. The way they deal with you is just transactional. There isn't a conveying the story. And other times you'll call an organization and you absolutely get someone who you talk to, who really represents what that company is all about through their energy, through the way they speak to you, through the language they use, their attitude towards you. You can really feel the difference in the two. So I think the problem I see in AI is a lot of the focus is on the transactional and productivity capability. It can do the things that we can do faster, better, at speed. But actually, we still need to give it that training and the understanding and the contextualization of what it's trying to do. What is it? What's the story it's operating within? Because if you deploy that same bot to Apple versus you deploy that same bot to, I don't know, Ryanair, they'll have two different stories that they're working inside of. The technical capability might be exactly the same, but the story they're operating inside of will be different.
Yeah, and it's so much more important that you get that brand voice, that the story you're telling spot on, because AI is quite binary, right? It's not going to understand nuance and context sometimes. So the more the projects that we've been working on, we've uncovered that many organizations haven't worked this stuff out, and because they haven't worked it out, there's risk there in terms of how your customers will perceive this. That there is always that worry and concern there. So it's kind of accelerating this process of getting that bit right. Yeah.
I sort of feel that, well, first of all, stats show that a vast majority of AI projects fail right now.
Yeah.
Companies are jumping on the bandwagon, are firing people, and then they regret it and try to get them back. And they think it's going to be easy. And then, either they're automating the wrong thing. There was this interesting saying where technology was going to replace parts of your business. And if it's replacing the stupid repetitive, stuff and frees up the humans to do the intelligent stuff, that's really powerful. If it automates the intelligent stuff and leaves the human to do, like London taxi drivers, they had to learn, they probably still do 25,000 roads. And, it was, to become a London taxi driver, I mean, that was really tough. And then Uber comes along, GPS, and takes away that intelligent part. Anybody can drive the car. And so then it sort of kills that whole business. And so you can also try to use AI. I love an AI bot when it gets, there's a practical question with a practical solution really quick. And then once yours, once your situation isn't quite that simple, well, switch to a human that can then get involved. And to manage that, is tricky, and but can make enormous difference.
Yeah.
I think the phrase that we use, companies are still working it out. What they're working out is they're working out the deployment of the technology, but actually the thing that they've never worked out is the story in the first place. Because if the story was well structured and told and they knew, the deployment of the AI and the technology becomes easier because you're building it on the same story foundational principles. Saying this is who we are, this is who we talk to, this is our language, this is the way that we operate. All of that stuff is done. But the fact that a lot of organizations haven't done that work without the AI. And so therefore, that's why you get the variability of service at different points of the journey when you speak to different teams or outsource parts of the organization, or their stakeholders aren't quite bought in. That's where the joins fall apart. And that's where you have those friction points where people don't feel the story is consistent, don't feel the journey is consistent, and start to fall out of love with a brand that they very much might have enjoyed at the very beginning when they first saw themselves and thought, oh, this is going to be great. I mean, how many times has that been? You've seen something, oh, this is going to be great. You start engaging with them, and then you're like, I'm really regretting this now. I don't understand why I did this. It's not quite what it was cracked up to be. And so I think that work is not separate from the AI. I think it's part of the same construct of how do you tell the story, or how do you build the story. And I just wanted to kind of bring us back to, John, sorry, because we skipped about a little bit, the fundamental difference between storytelling and story building and the building blocks. Obviously I don't want to give away all of your trade secrets, but what are one or two things that you think are common things people miss when they think about how do I build this story?
A lot of it comes back to the fact that they talk about themselves. I mean, what do companies do? All day long, they serve their customers, they're trying to get better, they check the quality, they add new features, they wonder what they're going to do next. It's us. And so you're out there and you say, hey, we do this great thing, and we do this, and we do this, and we do this. And if you can just step back, take your customer's standpoint and say, what are they looking for? I saw this ad in the States where this plumber, I think, instead of saying, hey, we're a great plumber, they said, we come on time. And it seems like in the States, these kind of contractors either don't show up or show up late. You have to take a full day off from work just to have your drippy faucet fixed. And so they really recognized, I'm not worried. You're a plumber. I trust you. So what I'm worried about is is you're coming on time. And that shift also shows it's not just coming on time, it's they're concerned about our time is valuable, what, our needs, they think about. I mean, it shows a whole perspective that creates trust, because you're out of your own head and you're thinking about your customer. I think one trap that companies fall into is personas. We work with, women from 18 to 35 or whatever kind of thing. And that box, that's not how people see themselves. And if you can start with, personas, but start with their aspirations, start with their challenges and all these things. And then you realize, well, actually what we're doing, fits also these, demographic traits. So the pictures on the website, fit what you think you're, all that. But sometimes, the old lady can have the same aspiration and challenge as the young boy, and that's fine. And you don't have to put them in those pre-constructed boxes. You're building a picture of your customer where they sort of recognize themselves. And it's sort of a check in the box. Oh, but we did this persona work. So we know our customers, but we're actually making these sort of stereotypical pictures of them where they won't recognize themselves.
Yeah. I think that recognition, I think when you look at go back to movies, if you look at all great movies, I think one of the reasons movies like Star Wars was so brilliant was that we all recognized ourselves in some of those characters, some of the traits those characters had, the struggles we went through, the doubt that we have, like subconsciously, we whenever we do anything in life, we see those things. So we resonate with those characters and the stories that are told, I think, at a really deep level. And to your point earlier on, that's how civilization, that's how humans, that's what we are born. Our DNA is around storytelling. That's how we communicate and connect with one another. And when there's bad storytelling, you don't connect. It's your point about companies just talk about themselves. They do. We often talk about, this is who we are. This is what we do. This is the credentials. There's a great equation that I use called the trust equation by David Meister. And he talks about trust is credibility plus reliability plus intimacy over self-orientation. And the credibility and the reliability is where most organizations focus. Here are the list of all of the certifications and things that I have that tell you that I can do what I do. And then they major on, we're going to deliver it for you, which is fine. And that will get you so far. The intimacy is where the customer looks and thinks to themselves, or the person looks and thinks to themselves, they care about me, they understand me, they know me. I get a feeling that they definitely see the world from my perspective. And then the self-orientation is the degree to which I feel you're in this just for yourself, or you're in this for me as well. And those two elements are where organizations do not focus enough attention, or don't convey that they focus enough attention through the way that they execute their various interaction points. And I think that a lot of that comes from the story building, both internally, so that when I onboard in an organization, I understand not just the mission, the values, and the typical induction that you get, but actually there's a deep story that I'm involved in here. So as I go about my work, that's coming through in the things I do, and then that reflects on the outside. And you see so many companies have shrunk that induction period for people coming on board in their organization. It's a 1-day corporate induction, or it's a 2-day, or, in contact centers, Iqbal would have seen it, we went from the days of people having an onboarding period of 6 weeks, 2 weeks training, 3 week green room, and then out on the floor too. You come in for your interview, you do 2 days training, and then you sat in a contact center starting to take calls, and you've had none of the immersion in the story.
Yeah, you don't feel part of it, do you? Because you're going to learn over time, but actually that experience initially is going to be pretty poor for the customer because you're just not familiar with it. I think what we're finding now is the onboarding is sped up even more because there's the assumption that AI is there supporting you every step of the way, right? That's what agents get now. They've got the AI telling them, okay, customer said this, here's some information. But again, no nuance, no context. It's so binary, and then that of course does reflect. But I think it's just a sign of times at the moment, right? Everything is in real time. There's no time given to try and help people get enabled in the right way. So I think that you lose some of this gold, because we're not spending enough time getting this bit right, I think. So yeah, it's really interesting, because the reality is very different to what we're discussing here. I think this is all great, but when I'm sat with organizations, like I've had a marketing department get in touch with me about extracting information from our data, i.e. conversations we're having with our customers, to uncover the problems that we're solving for our customers. Like, yes, we do surveys and we have a view on how we're helping customers with our product and services, but we actually want to try and uncover some insight from the data to see, actually, is there something there that we can use to then kind of market back to our customers, to say, these are all of the things that we're doing for our customers, and actually we're hearing it from that insight. And I think this is where you can start to use it to your advantages, and maybe adapt that story based on actually what's happening in real time, with some of the insights that are now available to many organizations.
I like this, the idea of this intimacy. And I find that those are the ones that, stick to mind. I did my MBA in Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon, and the first day I got there, I put my my card into the ATM, get some cash, and put the wrong code, and my card was blocked. And I was there for 3 weeks, and I thought, damn. I walked away. I probably did like 5 steps. My phone rang. UBS Zurich, you blocked your card. How can we help? And, that was 20 years ago. And I still tell the story. And so then, of course, you think 2 minutes and it's fraud control. There's a card blocked in Pittsburgh for the guy that lives in Geneva, Switzerland. But instead of saying, this is the card police, are you really John Elbing? They said, they turned it into this sentence. And I thought that was, artificial, but really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think those are the moments that stick. We talk a lot about, I talk a lot about every moment matters, and these small moments, trust is built in small moments over a period of time. Each of those interactions either confirms that you're still in the story and you still believe and you still trust, versus something's happened and I'm going to pull away. But those small moments matter, like that example that you gave. Why is it, do you think, that those small interactions stay with people for so long? What's behind it?
Well, it probably comes down to this idea that you're being taken into account. And there's another example that I found really powerful in a bank, wealth management, where they train the wealth managers to draw with a pen on paper the graphs and the things. So, all the other banks create these beautiful things on a screen and say, look at how wonderful this is. And no, what they say, but you sit down next to the person and sort of say, oh, so if you do this, and this kind of intimate moment of drawing the thing with your customer, that you can go at the right speed, they understand, they feel that they're doing a special thing for you and all that. I'm sure people come out of that, with better understanding, feel that they were heard, where at the end it's, they're delivering the same information, but in a way where there's that kind of intimacy that and then sticks with you.
There's a huge amount of psychology behind it. I think I was doing something this morning about the impact of dopamine, and the fact that habit forming starts with a dopamine hit when you actually do the thing and you get a good feeling from it. But then when that happens consistently over time, just the anticipation of doing the thing creates a similar dopamine hit. So if you work with a brand and your initial interaction might be, it was really great, the second one, third one, whatever, but then you build a relationship over time, just the anticipation of going, oh, I'm going to go to this, my favorite store, or I'm going to go to the place that I really like. Just the anticipation gives you that feel good feeling that is locked in your memory.
One word we haven't really used yet is emotion. And, that's powerful. These stories contain emotion. So when you talk about the person's problem, it's not just the problem. It's the fact that they're frustrated or they're worried. And it's not just that the problem will be solved, but they will be relieved, or they will be proud of the result. When you get into the story, it's this, the studies have shown that we make our make our decisions. In French, you take a decision, but in English, you make a decision. And somehow I'm bilingual, and somehow every time I stumble on that. Anyways, the emotion takes over, and then we invent a rational story to justify our choice. And so that is really important.
Yeah. My wife has worked that out. That's what I do. Rationalize it after the event. Every time I buy something, she's figured that out.
But not only that, but they say that, we actually unconsciously make decisions, and that our brain, we think that in an MRI, they actually see that the decision was made before that you actually in your brain realize, have gone through the process. And so there is this sportscaster almost to saying, okay, John is thinking this, and we tried that and things, and this is the decision John took. And but actually, there's a lot of unconscious decision making behind it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, is that phrasing, that gut instinct, because I think there's also a study that shows that the nerve endings within your gut are very similar to that within your brain. So that gut instinct that you have that compels you to go, I'm going to take this decision, is often the right decision, and then your brain then backwards engineers the reasoning to confirm the decision that you've made. But in that moment, often we operate on gut instinct, on emotion that tells us that this is safe. I feel good about this. I'm going to do it, and then you tend to do it. That's how your decision making works.
Yeah. So I should go on a diet, but I think I don't want to reduce my gut, which would reduce my decision making.
That's a good excuse. That's good reasoning.
I like that. I'm going to use that. That's really good. That's the reason I eat so much, because I need to rely on my decision making.
Exactly.
So, John, we're coming towards the end of our time together, but I want to give you the opportunity to pull out, like, if there are founders, organizations, people in organizations who are tasked with telling stories, what are 2 or 3 tips that you could give to them? I know we've talked already about know your audience and know who you're talking to, but are there 1 or 2 other things that you could leave people with that would help them to build a more compelling story, or at least build the right parts of the story?
So at some point you said, you didn't want me to give away all my tips and tricks, but so I did write the book where I give away all my tips and tricks.
Yeah.
If you want to, if you go for story building your brand from their standpoint, that's the subtitle. So you can get all the tips and tricks. And even if you go to the website, standpoint.ch, you can go to my contact form and say you're coming from the podcast, and I'll give you a free hour of looking at your story, your brand, and seeing if I can help.
Oh, maybe. That's a great offer. Thank you.
I just added a tagline generator where actually you have to talk about your customer, talk about your thing, and it has 6 different formats, and then refines them, and you choose them, and you come out, and not only you sort of get a tagline, but again, the process of going through all that actually is interesting because it clarifies what you're doing. So that was my first vibe coding AI Claude thing that I did just to understand what's going on. And so that was an amazing thing. But so I think the first thing is this idea of flipping the script, to stop talking about yourself. Say, it's okay, your customer, who are they? What are their aspiration, their challenge, why, and how do you fit in their story? And just thinking about it that way sort of changes your perspective. And instead of saying, how can we deliver our great service, is how can we make our customer, how can we deliver this positive future that we're promising? And this exercise of saying, that forces you to say, of everything you're doing, what is the core thing that really makes the difference? Because and that's so much easier to say than to do. I mean, I struggle with my own thing. I said, but I also do this and this, and I'm great at this. And no, it's sort of like, hey, you're in this situation. I guess one last thing is trigger moments. I'll get a call by like an insurance company saying, are you happy with your insurance? And I think, I don't know, I don't care, and I hang up. But if they called me and said, hey, we know you just bought a house, and we're sure you have this insurance, but here's something interesting. I would stay on the line. Or you're starting a business, we have something interesting to say. If you can find those moments where your customer is primed to be interested. As a young father, you're worried about what you feed your baby. Well, young fathers will say, well, I wasn't yet, but now I am. Tell me more. But if you just said, we do baby food, that won't be engaging. And often there are those moments that you can leverage that make a difference.
Yeah, definitely. They're great tips. Well, listen, John, that's been really great to talk to you today. Thank you for all your insights and for sharing the world of storytelling. I'm sure people listening to this will get a whole load of value. We'll put the links to your website in the description when we post this on our YouTube channel, and any other information that you want to give us, we can copy it into the description. But yeah, Iqbal, anything that you want to kind of add in?
No, I think just to wrap up, John, really appreciate your time and the insight. I'm definitely going to try your website out for my own business just to see what it comes up with. So that's really interesting. And I think that the trigger moments that you mentioned at the end are just I think they're spot on, because actually that's how you can really get. It's almost a call to action at that point, because you're almost touching a point that really resonates with those trigger points. So yeah, look, thank you, appreciate your time today, and look forward to catching up again soon. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. This has been a lot of fun, and I'll happy to have been here.
Thank you.